but she learned to forgive them. And she went all over the world telling her story and helping other people to forgive others. And that's, every one of my characters has a theme. And the Corrie ten Boom one is on forgiveness. Very powerful. My husband has seen me do that many times, and he still cries at the end.
Hi, thank you for joining us here on the Locala podcast. I am your host today, Taylor Strickland, and I am here with our very special guest, Dee Collier. Hi, Dee.
Hi, thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am a native Floridian, third-generation native Floridian. Grew up in the Fort Pierce area. We've been in Ocala about 48 years. Quite a long time. Love Ocala very much. And I was a former elementary school teacher. I loved teaching school. Matter of fact, I loved education so much growing up. I would even line up my dolls and my stuffed animals and teach them whatever I had learned at school that day. Became a teacher for several years, and now I love the way that I am instructing people by doing historical characterizations, becoming actual people from history and portraying that to other people. All the time I have people telling me things like, "Oh, I wish you'd been my teacher. I might have gotten an A in history."
Yeah, that is really amazing. When you were teaching school in elementary school, did you do special things for your students like this?
Actually, I did. If they were to have a book report or do a special project, if they became a character and dressed up and stuff, I knew they were going to be learning more, so that I would give the kids extra credit for that. And I guess that just kind of was part of my life so much that eventually when this opportunity came along, I did it myself.
Was the history side of what you taught, because I know as an elementary school teacher, your responsibility is to make sure they have a good understanding of every subject, but were you particularly drawn to history?
Well, yes, the last several years that I taught, we did team teaching, and I taught the science, math, and history, and the other teacher taught the English type skills. So yes, the history was always my real love. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I actually thought about majoring in history in college, but I got drawn to elementary ed. I love kids.
They both really feed into each other. So for your historical, I know you mentioned that you're not a historical reenactor, you're a historical storyteller. You dress up as your characters, and are you in character the whole time?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the funny things is when, at the end, when I do ask for questions, I'll open it up for questions. Sometimes, oh gosh, at least half the time, somebody will say, "When did you die?" I will go, "I'm sorry, I am still alive. Would you care to feel my pulse?"
How do they respond to that?
And they laugh, and people will usually nudge them around. I'm like, "She's still that person. She's still alive."
Well, that is very cool. You know, as someone, I have to admit, I am a bit shy. So even as a teacher, I could not imagine standing in front of students and acting in character. Was that something that you had to get over, or did it just come naturally?
It just came naturally.
Oh, a performer, born.
Absolutely. I love drama and am in plays from time to time. Thoroughly enjoy it from the time I was a kid.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
So the two kind of melded. The drama, the love of history, all kind of came together.
So when was the idea specifically for historical characters born?
Oh, my goodness. At least probably 13, 14 years ago, I was in a play with a friend, and she teaches AP European history at one of our high schools. And she was bemoaning the fact that the AP kids will have to take their test earlier in the year. And so she's not going to teach them anything at that point. So she asked me, she says, "Why don't you dress up and pretend you're somebody from World War II and come to my class?" And I have done her classes every year since then. She asked, I said, "Well, first of all, I know quite a bit about Corrie ten Boom, the Holocaust survivor. Would that be okay?" And she said, "Oh, sure, that's fine." And I've done Corrie ten Boom, and I've done Florence Nightingale for her classes. And I don't know, maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, she said, they're not tested on Corrie ten Boom, but they are tested on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. How about if you come before they have to take their test and you be his twin sister? And I went, oh, he had a twin sister? I didn't even know that. But that's one of the things that I've really loved about doing this is when I do the research, which takes a very long time, I find out all kinds of things. And I really love to find out little nuggets about these people that obviously a history book is not going to give you. And people probably don't know about it. So I've done Dietrich Bonhoeffer's twin sister, Sabina, several years for her and for many other groups too.
It's a really good way to get children and other people to connect to someone who really just seems like a name in a page or on a page.
Not only that, but I usually, for the most part, the women that I portray, and I'm getting ready to work on number 26 in just a few weeks. So the women that I portray, for the most part, are people who have overcome huge issues in their life. I mentioned Florence Nightingale a few minutes ago. Florence Nightingale was a nurse. She was a nurse, kind of started the nursing profession. Well, before she became a nurse, the only people who were nurses were a drunk prostitute who came before a judge and had the choice of either going to jail or working in a hospital. And so you can imagine what the conditions in hospitals were like.
Oh, yeah.
So I let that be known to people, and I love seeing their reaction on their faces when they realize that there's something similar in these people's lives that's in their own life of being able to overcome difficulties, being able to overcome the world being against you, that clicking, that recognition, that connection with people is just really exciting. And I can read their faces and see that. And I think that sparks me on quite a bit too.
Do you think, when you look at them, do you think the response is overall positive?
Oh, yes. Now, my qualification for doing a good job is if I'm doing a senior citizens group and it's after lunch and nobody falls asleep.
Oh, that's great. I guess that would be anyone's qualification of a good job. So for the characters, some of them's by request, but is it mostly those you have an affinity for or you're drawn to?
Yes, I really do not only have to have an affinity for them. Sometimes I just keep hearing a name and I go, well, maybe I can investigate that. That's what happened with this one that I'm getting ready to delve into in a couple of weeks. And that's Rosie the Riveter.
Oh, wow.
I thought she was just a symbol of the women during World War II who went to work in the factories because all the men were away at the war. She was a real person.
Oh, wow. I've only ever seen her on the tins. She's like this.
Yeah. And I already have my costume. I have that outfit with the red bandana, and I got the little name tag that says Rosie.
So this is a bit of an exclusive
yes.
of an upcoming character. Yes. That is really, really amazing. So obviously there was a good response in terms of like your professional life, but how did people in your personal life respond? Were they like, Dee, that's so crazy. How are you going to do this?
I don't think anybody actually said that. They may have thought it, but they didn't say it. My husband is very, very supportive. He encourages me, and even though he's not into drama himself, he does have a couple of costumes that are the husband of these people. And occasionally he's able to go and introduce me. He has a George Washington costume. He also has an Al Capone costume. And he has a Viking costume. I think that's all. And he, if he's able to, of course, he works full time as a CPA, so kind of busy. But he will go and introduce me as those characters.
How many people can say their CPA moonlights as, as a Viking? Yeah, exactly. You mentioned before, and you mentioned her name. One of your favorite character or historical figures to reenact is Corrie ten Boom. That's the one that you keep returning to. That's the one that you have a particular affinity for.
I do. She was an amazing woman. She and her family were Christians, but yet they hid over 700 Jews and Jewish sympathizers during World War II. They had a special wall built in Corey's bedroom with a panel at the bottom of it. And whenever they would have like 4 or 5 guests, they called their Jews that were hiding from the Nazis. And if the Germans came into her father's watch shop on the bottom floor, then somebody would push a buzzer that only sounded upstairs, and the guest would have to go get into, they called it the angel room, and hide there until the Germans were gone. Wow. They eventually were caught and ended up in a concentration camp. Her father died there. Her sister died there. Corey held so much hatred for the Nazis. It didn't understand why she ended up being released. It was a clerical error, she found out later. But she learned to forgive them. And she went all over the world telling her story and helping other people to forgive others. And that's, every one of my characters has a theme. And the Corrie ten Boom one is on forgiveness. Very powerful. My husband has seen me do that many times, and he still cries at the end.
And you sort of continued her story. Because I know we talked about it a little bit before the camera started rolling. Lots of people today are, well, not lots of people, but some people deny the Holocaust even existed. And I feel like someone like you who brings these characters to life is a reminder that we did exist. These struggles happened, and they're very real, and I would like to convey them to you in a relevant way.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Do you feel you help in that way? Do you feel like people come away with that lesson and understanding that these were real people, like that you bring them to life for them?
That is true.
Do you ever had anyone come up to you and say that?
Well, I have fooled several people.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, I was doing a senior citizens group one time as Fanny Crosby, a blind poet who wrote a lot of the old hymns of the church. And so I have to have somebody, because I play a blind poet, I have someone lead me in and lead me out. And afterwards, the person who was leading me out led me out a door, like an outside door, and the audience could see that. And there were steps to go down and out to where I was changing clothes. And the person just led me to the door and then turned around and went back. One of the ladies came up to him and said, "Why did you lead that blind lady outside? She can't find her way around."
They were looking out for you.
Yes, they were.
That's great, though. That speaks to your acting skills.
I hope so.
I'm sure they're very impressive. I've not yet had the chance to see them, but I'm sure they are. But back to Corrie ten Boom a little bit. Is there anything about her life that speaks to you personally differently than the other ones, or is it just because she was the first? Or one of the first?
Well, she was the very first one I portrayed, and I guess I always have a warm spot in my heart. And people keep asking for her over and over. And I think that when I'm able to portray her and them see that if she was able to forgive the horrors that the Nazis did, and her own family members died because of it, maybe they can as well. And when I portray this to schools, that's what I want these kids to realize, that even though you have former enemies, you can learn to get along.
That's something schools, I think, would really like for their kids, especially nowadays, with things
Absolutely.
being so tumultuous, to be taught to them. What was that first performance like?
I was scared to death. I taught elementary, and these were high school kids. Well, I was a little intimidated by them. But as I got going, I realized that these kids needed to hear it. And I think that's one thing that kind of spurs me on, is people need to hear about these lives. These were incredible people that they didn't know anything about. And they are... They were real, and they had the same difficulties that we do today. And they overcame them. So maybe other people can as well.
Is it schools that you frequent the most?
Probably not, because I do civic clubs and I do a lot of senior citizens luncheons. As a matter of fact, I'm after I finish here today, I'm doing a senior citizens luncheon down in Bushnell, and this is, I think, the fourth year they've asked me to come back.
Oh.
And today I'm doing Annie Sullivan, Helen Keller's teacher.
Oh, very interesting.
Yes, and I had to learn a little bit of sign language to be able to do this. And I really do love learning new skills and being able to make it just as real as possible for people.
That gives us like a unique moment. So when you leave here, what is character preparation like?
Well, all the way down to Bushnell, I will be going over my lines to make sure that I have them. I mean, I know it, but I just like to review it. And then when I get there and get in costume, I like to sit and get my accent. She had a slight Irish accent.
Okay.
So I get into character. I think about it. I think about what I want to get across to people. And that is determination to find the key to unlock someone's mind as an educator. And that's what Annie Sullivan did. She didn't give up. She kept trying until she found exactly what Helen Keller needed. And obviously, that made such a difference in the whole world.
Yeah. It's also really nice. I know Annie Sullivan. I think we have videos of her and Helen. Some that you can review.
Yes.
Which brings me to my next question. So when it comes to, the minutia of researching these characters, how deep do you go?
Well, I usually do about a 30-minute monologue is basically what these are. And I find a lot more than I actually use. And I go with books and YouTube and Wikipedia and anything that I can find about the person. And I compile them in different categories. And then I decide, well, what would the audience like to hear about? Yeah. And I do, even with Corrie ten Boom, and as horrible and difficult as her life was, I try to add some humor everywhere in each character because people like to laugh.
Oh, that's a good point. Some of these people have lived pretty terrible lives. Do you have to, I would presume you have to edit yourself depending on your audience. Yeah. Some, I'm sure elementary schools or even middle and high schools would not want to hear the gory details.
No, and elementary schools are the ones that when I open it up for questions at the end, I never know what questions I'm going to get from elementary kids. I was doing Martha Washington for a group of fifth graders one time, and at the end they were saying, well, did you have any pets? Now, I knew George had hunting dogs, so I was telling them about that. And they said, well, did you have a favorite? I'm going, okay, I'm just going to have to make this up as I go along. And I said, well, and I had told them about the sheep because they had sheep at Mount Vernon and they sheared them twice a year. So I said, well, anytime that we would shear the sheep, there was this one little lamb that he would just be shivering, and we just called him Shivers. Well, what happened to Shivers? And I said, I get my handkerchief. I go, remember how I told you that the British came and they took all of our livestock and all of our crops? And they're going, the British took Shivers? No! The teachers were howling.
That's bringing it back, though.
Yeah.
To the main point.
Yes. So they were it was really funny. So I'm telling my husband about it that night at dinner. And he says, you do realize that's the only thing they're going to remember. And they're going to go home going, Mom, the British took Shivers.
Yes, but they'll know that it was the British. That's the important part. We brought the lesson back. That's where being a teacher comes in. You have to redirect the class.
Absolutely.
This is the main point. Have you ever had anyone respond negatively?
Actually, I did. I portray Mrs. Santa Claus. And that's a shorter one because there's really not very much about her, obviously.
We all forget about Mrs. Claus.
Poor Mrs. Claus. And I was doing her this past December quite a few times in one place in a town that's not too far from here. I always had this naughty and nice list. And I generally would ask somebody, can I put you on the naughty list before I do it? Well, I only knew one name in the group, and that was my contact person. And I hadn't had a chance to ask her. She was very busy, so I didn't ask her. But I figured everybody's like, oh, sure. They think that's fun and funny. Well, I said something about her being on the naughty list, but it wasn't too late. She could still get on the nice list. And afterwards, she excoriated me for putting her on the naughty list. And I was telling somebody about it later, and they said, well, she probably needs to be on the naughty list.
An adult woman?
An adult woman. I'm a fictitious character with a fictitious list. And she laid into me.
That's also so wild to think about. Out of all of the historical figures you have, infamous and famous, and that's what made someone upset.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Exactly.
Wow. By the way, speaking of this, you gave me this wonderful list of all your costumes. And I can see that they are very different from each other. Where do you get them? Do you make them yourself?
The costumes,
Yeah.
If I can purchase them online, I will. But if I can't find them, I make them myself.
Wow.
Yeah, I love to sew. It just that it takes a lot of time to do the preparation for all this, and I would prefer not to have to make them. But I made my Martha Washington costume and Rachel Walker Revere and Fanny Crosby. I wanted something very authentic, like late 1800s, with the high collar and the buttons down the front. And so I got a pattern online to make it, and it said on there to make 23 buttons and buttonholes. No. So I just did Velcro underneath and sewed the buttons on top.
So you have to be pretty industrious when it comes to not just costuming, but I suppose the rest of it as well.
I try to be.
I'm sure you are. In terms of historical characterization and historical reenactment, where would you like to see your business and your involvement in that move forward?
I did 109 characterizations last year.
Wow.
So moving forward, I just want to bring history to life for whoever I can. I go to schools and churches and nursing homes and civic groups and senior luncheons and all kinds of things. And I thoroughly enjoy wherever I am. So I just take each individual time and enjoy that particular moment with those people.
Have you ever collabed with anyone? Is there any sort of collaboration, or are you aware of any other historical reenactors?
I know
around?
there are some.
Here?
Somebody, I know that there's somebody who portrays Betsy Ross, and they get me mixed up with her. Oh, when you did Betsy Ross, I don't do Betsy Ross. I do Martha Washington.
Oh, wow.
But yes, and then there's a lady, I don't know if she still does it. She lived down in Leesburg or Mount Dora. And I saw her do a portrayal one time. She was wonderful, but I had heard that she was getting up in years and wasn't able to do it anymore.
I've heard recently they're attempting down in the historical district, we're actually pretty close to it, that they're attempting to make more historical tours, like walking tours and things like that. Would that be something you're interested in?
Probably not, because I really like telling the story.
Yes, not just giving the tour.
Correct. Yes.
I think because I was up in Washington and they had one of those historical walking tours, but they didn't walk with you. There were people who were like constantly acting on the sidewalks and things like that. So that when I was first introduced to what you do, that's what I was thinking of. What's the difference between what you do and what they do? Like, how do you present the story?
Well, with mine, it's like a 30-minute monologue, generally.
Oh, okay.
And with them, they're like in and out, and they're reacting with other people and stuff. And they're great. That's like in Williamsburg. They have people that do that. And
That's exactly what I was talking about.
Okay.
That's where I was.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, I love that. And that's fabulous. Anytime that you can make history come alive for people, I think that's extremely important, which is what I call my website, makehistorycomealive.com.
Oh, great. What can people find on your website?
They can find a list of the characters. Most of the characters. There are a couple of characters that I did for specific things that I haven't portrayed except for that one time. Like my elementary school, for their 100th anniversary, I portrayed me as a sixth grader. So, nobody else would be interested in that. And then for some other groups I have. But they'll find the list of my characters. They'll find my contact information. And they'll also find, I think there's a couple of video snippets, and there's letters of recommendations from people who have seen me portray these characters and have written me really nice letters about it.
Oh, that's so nice. I'm so glad that there's been such an outpouring of appreciation for what you do. I feel like educators in particular, but especially people who are in the arts and things like that, or who are doing anything new and different, so many times their work goes unappreciated. So I'm glad that that's not true for you.
Yeah, they have. They've been very, very kind.
What's your sweet spot in terms of reenactment?
Whatever. The only time that I turn people down is if I'm already booked or if there's I've been to the Atlanta area. And to Fort Pierce. That's probably my biggest spread of where I go. Of course, I have grandchildren in the Atlanta area, and I get to visit them at the same time.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
What do they think of what you do?
Not all of them have seen me do things, but it depends on what age they were when I got started. Some of them were already in high school, so I let them know. I know. I let them know I'd be glad to come to their class, and they let their teachers know. But it's kind of a hard thing if you're not familiar with a person. If you don't want just anybody coming into your classroom, you might think they might not be very good and not worth the time.
Oh, yeah. And you also, do you just field it with the teachers, or do you have to go through the principal and like the school and everything?
Well, usually a teacher will request to the principal, and then I have to be approved by the county school board.
Have you ever been rejected?
No.
Okay, good.
No.
Good. Just making sure no one has it out for you.
Absolutely.
One thing that I wanted to ask you before we depart is when we portray historical figures or we talk about the past, I feel like a lot of people have a duty to tell the story as authentically as possible. Has there ever been a time where you felt concerned or pressured about the people you were presenting, or?
No, not really. You mean like if they had descendants in the audience and they felt like I wasn't telling the truth?
Things like that.
Well, actually, that's one reason I do Lizzie Jane, I call her. She's a compilation of women living in Marion County in the late 1800s. When I would go to schools and do Martha Washington for fifth graders, the fourth grade teacher said, "Do you have anybody from Florida?" So then I developed this character that I call Lizzie Jane, named for my two grandmothers. And so in my research, I really couldn't find enough about one woman living in Marion County at that era. So I make a compilation, and I tell little stories of Marion County, including the fire of 1883. I definitely wanted to put that in because most people don't even know why we're called Brick City.
I don't.
Well, you have to come to one of my presentations. It's Lizzie Jane.
Listen, I will. If you notify me, I will look it up. If you post it on any sort of page, I will make sure I'm there to learn about Lizzie Jane.
All right. Lizzie Jane she's one of my favorites because she gets a lot of humor. I do a lot of humor involved with that. But so the compilation kind of gave me an out because I didn't want to be doing the presentation and have somebody in the audience going, "That was my great-grandmother," and that's not really what happened.
Yes, no one ever raising their hand saying, actually, that's not how that happened.
No. So that's why I do the compilation, and I tell lots of different stories about different people, but I make it like it's me.
That's nice. It's very creative. I think the only one I really know, I don't know about anyone around Locala other than, this isn't even close to Locala, but it's the lady who wrote The Yearling.
Right, Marjorie Kennan Rawlings.
Yes.
And there is a lady who portrays her. Oh, she's wonderful. I saw her at the Dunellen Library one time, years ago, when I was first starting to do these characters. And with her, she had to have read all of Marjorie Kennan Rawlings' works because people ask her questions. And she stayed in character too. Like somebody said, "Are your books available on a Kindle?" And she said, "What's a Kindle?"
Oh, that's
Yeah,
nice.
yes.
That's nice. I suppose if you do just one, that leaves the opportunity to be so in depth.
Exactly.
Like you get to specialize.
Right.
So people can find you on your website, which is?
MakeHistoryComeAlive.com.
Okay, very nice. Thank you, Dee, for talking
You're
with
very
us
welcome.
today.
It's been a pleasure.
It really has been such a
Thank you.
pleasure. I love what you do, and I love learning about what you do.
Thank you.
And thank you all for staying with us and listening to Dee Collier and all of her stories about her historical characterizations. Once again, here on the Locala podcast, I am Taylor Strickland. This is Dee Collier. You can visit us at our website at localamag.com for more stories. And if you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe or leave a comment when it is available. Bye.
So I saved as much money as I could, saving for a rainy day. That's what I was taught. So that's what I tried to do. And then I would go live abroad, quite literally in a hostel. And the cost of living, I would live for cheaper than it would have been to stay here, to stay in the U.S.